It's been a great year for Wuthering Waves, but all the same, it was far from perfect. Now that we're about to leave Rinascita, it's time for one of my favorite things, to relive every step along the way and get a wider perspective on the whole experience. While many seem to think the recent awards they won may have been more deserved by other games, the fact is that WuWa's fans are happy for a good reason. Version 2 has had its flaws, but overall it's been a triumph. Let's talk about it. Of course, before we get started, I kinda have to emphasize, while I like WuWa a lot, from what I've seen, the average player likes it a hell of a lot more than me. Most of the things which feel a little off to me, or which I don't enjoy that much, are either things which the main target audience don't care about, or they're the very reason those people play the game. Some think that means I should shut up and stick to other games instead. Sorry to disappoint, but it's a fun game I enjoy playing. When parts of it don't work for me, I find it interesting to figure out why, and even more interesting to hear other people explain why they actually like that part in the response. It can often help me see things a little differently. And note that I do the opposite too. Dissecting why I did enjoy something is just as fun. I'm not asking Kuro to delete the things you like and change the game to suit my whims. I'm just being honest and sharing a different perspective on a fantastic game. Anyway, first, it's important to put Rinascita into context. Version 1 was undeniably rocky at times, and the game had a host of technical problems at launch and a fairly patchy story. However, it had potential. The combat was fantastic, the world was interesting, and most importantly, the developers clearly cared about the game and listened to the community's feedback. Personally, I love science fiction, especially when it's melded with tropes more common in fantasy, so the game we were promised to become sounded amazing to me. And yet, even though I stuck through the worst of it, my excitement slowly wore away. I enjoyed the exploration less than I'd hoped, the combat's focus on mechanical complexity above all else was fun, but not enough to motivate me to spend hours on it, and the story didn't capture my attention. It had become a very good game, but perhaps one targeting a different audience to me, so towards the end of version 1, I took a break. Enter Rinascita. Version 2.0 was a huge upgrade on pretty much every level. Take exploration, for example. In Huanglong, the traversal was designed to be as smooth and as freeing as possible. Many people felt this was one of the biggest selling points of the game, and set a new standard for what they expect from an open-world experience. Personally, I prefer games where exploring is the main focus, so for me this approach made it a little less fun. In the new region, they added flight, which could have easily taken the game further in that direction. What could be more freeing than being able to fly? I expected more of the same. Exploration designed to take as little effort as possible, which would feel great to the target audience, but leave me wishing for something different. Instead, it felt incredible. They added physics, momentum, and a stamina system, and tied it all together to make flight an exhilarating gameplay experience in its own right. It's intuitive enough that it doesn't take conscious thought, but there's enough going on that for every moment in the air, you're constantly engaged. I stopped using teleporters because flying from A to B just felt like pure joy. It's certainly different from a typical exploration game, yet it somehow manages to hit the same spot. A world filled with interesting things to discover, with traversal mechanics in between which are fun to engage with. I reached 100% in Raguna without ever using the compass or the built-in guide, and enjoyed every moment. I'm still impressed that Kuro figured out a way to make this work both for people who want engaging traversal mechanics and for all the players who had loved their approach in version 1. The story was much improved as well, though I was maybe a little less enthralled by it than many. The hook which set us on our way was that Abbey is weakening, and the best place for us to find out what's wrong is Rinascita, a region renowned for their deep knowledge of echoes and their ability to tame them. Our goal is to seek out Imperator, the region's sentinel, who should have the answers. We sail to Raguna, a vibrant city-state on the northern coast of Rinascita, and meet several interesting characters. Brant and Rachia rescue us from danger at sea, then after we arrive, Phoebe and then Zani guide us around the city and give us a crash course in Rinascita's culture and religion and the conflict between the city's two aristocratic families. The religious order of the deep are sus. Primus from Rico is supposed to be the only person who can talk to the Sentinel, but Imperator contacts Rover through a rogue echo instead, plus we see hints that Phoebe's faith is wavering. Rover teams up with Carlotta, a member of the Montelli family rooting out corruption within her family and the Order. They infiltrate her family's vault and eventually uncover the traitors who were turning echoes into time bombs. The two split up and Rover decides to investigate a particularly powerful TD, the Dragon of Dirge, which he eventually defeats with the help of Rachia and Brant. The story comes to a head at Raguna's Carnival as our old foe Folova shows up to summon chaos and reveal the dark truth about the Blessed Maiden revered by the Order. Cue a dramatic showdown where Rover saves the day with help from all our new friends. In the aftermath, Imperator tells Rover that we should seek answers in a mysterious inverted tower floating above the world. The presentation was fantastic, with great voice acting, good pacing, solid cinematography, and gorgeous cutscenes. Compared to the previous quests, it really caught people's attention. It was particularly welcome to see characters who had interactions with one another rather than just the rover. However, I wasn't quite as hyped as many for this chapter on its own. It was good, and it laid a ridiculous amount of groundwork for the stories to come. By Gacha standards, it was top tier, but I was left wishing for a bit more depth. The Carnival situation is emblematic of how I felt. It was presented as a big finale where we team up with our friends to confront the villain, and they did a good job of telling that story in an engaging way. But imagine if, instead, we hadn't quite gained everyone's trust yet. Instead of an Avengers Assemble moment, the battle could have been the fire which forged our friendships into something stronger. It would have required a little more trust from the players, acceptance that maybe not all characters should be head over heels for the rover the moment they meet, but it would have made our friendships feel earned, and the payoff in the end would have been genuinely moving. Some of the world building seemed fairly cliché, and a bunch of the decisions they made left me mildly disappointed in the end. It was a good start, and at the end of the day, most people enjoyed it for what it was. I just couldn't help but see the ways it could have been great instead. Version 2.1 took a break from the main story and is generally considered a bit of a filler patch. However, I actually think it's a little underrated, and Kura's approach to filler here deserves a lot of praise. The main event here was the Riccioli Islands, a new, smaller area off the coast of Rinascita, which provided a fresh new gameplay loop to liven up its exploration, open water fishing. They also added the Avrado Vault underground, which was a fun maze-like area we explored during a quest. I like it when they include at least some exploration in these patches, and I think it's a good place for them to experiment and come up with different ways for us to experience the world. Fishing is often implemented in games in the most irritating ways, and WuWa's version stands out as a pretty fun approach. Other open-world live service games could learn a thing or two from this. Filler patches should still have something fun for people who are there for exploration. They also had a fair few things for combat enjoyers to spend their time on, with a couple of fun events, a new hologram, the new weekly 1000 Gateways event, but unfortunately, the new endgame, Wuthering Waves, was a disappointment. Personally, I was most interested in the battle simulation event, where you can collect buffs by fighting enemies while trekking across the overworld, or head to the bosses straight away for a more challenging fight without those buffs. It was pretty basic, but I can't help but feel that there's potential endgame there, some kind of roguelike mode which combines exploration and combat and lets you choose the trade-offs you want to make. Either way, 2.1 was pretty decent for a filler patch. If they're going to need some time to cook their next story, giving us a mix of different types of gameplay along with trying something new is a pretty good compromise. The next chapter in the story starts with us meeting Chacona, a bard whose resonance ability lets people relive past events. At our request, she sends us back to a moment just after the Carnival when we encountered Kartathea, a key figure in the Renacitan religion who has been missing for decades. Kartathea somehow steps into our vision too and reveals that she's locked in a sonorosphere, has only fragmented memories, and is uncertain whether she's a resonator for the Sentinel or for the Threnodian. Naturally, it's time to investigate. We meet the head of the Phasalia family, Cantarella. She reveals that Leviathan has corrupted everything in Rinascita, twisting the culture and religion to its own ends, including Imperator itself. The Phasalias have been resisting, searching for the Blessed Maiden destined to take up the fallen Imperator's mantle and lead the fight, but Cantarella discovered the maiden is already dead. Together we journey to the inverted Tower of Avenolium, and with Kartathea's help, we collect the 3 swords needed to break the seal surrounding the tower. At first she's very shy and uncertain, but our friendship grows throughout the story as we slowly uncover the truth behind the layers of lies. She was, indeed, created by the Threnodian, and resonated with both Leviathan and the corrupted Imperator, triggering the Dark Tide itself. But she resisted. The true Blessed Maiden was Cantarella, but she sacrificed her powers to Imperator at the crucial moment, allowing Kartathea to shatter her very self into pieces and thwart the Threnodian's plans. This led to a spectacular confrontation with the corrupted fragments of Kartathea, known as Fleur de Lis, which breaks the Threnodian's hold on Rinascita. This was, for me at least, a fantastic experience. The story wasn't groundbreaking or unexpected, or even particularly original. It didn't have world-shattering stakes or mind-bending twists. I can totally understand the people who felt that Kartithia was a little too cliched with her shy demeanor and growing friendship with the rover. But for me, it was a heartfelt story with a cast of interesting characters whose relationships felt organic, whose existence didn't just focus on the rover, even some who grew and changed throughout. It had pacing, which kept me engaged from start to finish, world building, which was intriguing, which made sense on a surface level, but still had layers of depth underneath, and of course, an ending which was absolute cinema. It showed that perhaps Kuro could make the most of the intriguing characters and settings they create, something which could live up to their fantastic presentation. I could go on and on about exactly why I love this so much. Chacona's introduction, Cantarella's subversion of expectations, Kartithia's satisfying character arc, which set her up to be central moving forwards, but that's a video I made already. After playing this, for the first time, I felt truly excited for the next chapter in WuWa's story. One part of 2.2, which I have mixed feelings about, however, is the exploration. Burr Waters was underwhelming, a fairly pretty but very barren island without much to make it stand out aside from that gorgeous night sky. Meanwhile, Avinolium was one of the most stunning areas in the game, a shattered palace suspended in the sky with a true sense of grandeur, scale and history. In the rest of Rinascita, a slight downside to the convenience of flight is that each region feels a little smaller than it should, because the distance between each place zooms past in a blur. Avinolium, meanwhile, feels even bigger when you soar through its vaulted halls. I think it's the area which makes the best use of flight, and I found it even more entrancing to explore than anywhere else, which is why I'm kinda sad that there wasn't all that much to do there in the end. Both regions added in this patch were pretty huge, but they were oddly sparse with little to do while you're there. At the time, the story stood out so much that it almost felt like they'd put all their effort into that instead, with the exploration just an afterthought, and I didn't really mind. In retrospect, they were perhaps below their usual standards. And there's actually another aspect of version 2.2 which I've also covered in its own dedicated video, the virtual crisis event. In my experience, pretty much every endgame mode in every gacha game is, at its core, a DPS check where the real enemy is a countdown timer. They add all sorts of quirks and buffs and layers of gameplay on top of this idea in the hopes of differentiating them, but even the ones which are the most unique are really not that different. This approach often leads to power creep, which makes it all pretty boring in the long run. In 2.2, Kuro introduced the Virtual Crisis event, a combat challenge which I enjoyed far more than any other. It's a challenge without timers, where the goal is to defeat the enemies in whatever way you see fit, even if it takes half an hour. You pick your own level of difficulty by stacking buffs and debuffs, and it quickly becomes a genuine challenge. And yet, because there's no timer, there are more options than just pick the strongest team. Even better, building up your skills can be a gradual experience as you add just a little more challenge every time, rather than brick wall you bash your head against until you finally get it right. My only complaint was that it was probably a little too easy for people who are really into WuWa's combat, and I felt they should have let people massively raise the ceiling to give a challenge to even the best players. The fact that we get Whimpering Wastes every patch and not this instead is, well, a waste. Version 2.3 was a hugely controversial patch at the time. It was the game's first anniversary, and some people built up a ton of expectations that they'd be uniquely generous and give us something awesome as a celebration. The livestream came off as a little tone deaf at times, but I really felt the outrage was a little overblown. It would be nice if gacha companies were to treat their players well, but if they really wanted to do that, they probably wouldn't be creating gachas in the first place. A major part of the issue was that this patch happened to be another filler one, with no advancement on the main story, no exploration at all, and one of the other major additions was a huge disappointment. The anniversary event was cute, with a load of different minigames to dig into, but since I was so excited for the next chapter in the story this time, it felt like truly empty filler to me. It's interesting how much your level of impatience for the next act changes your experience so much. The story quest for Zani and Chacona were both pretty great though, especially Chacona's, so at least we had those to tide us over. But the biggest disappointment for me was the Solaris Film Festival, which was presented as the new incarnation of the Elusive Realm. That mode had been my favourite part of the game in version 1, one of the things which kept me coming back even when I was less interested in the rest. It was a roguelike mode where you could stack buffs and end up ridiculously overpowered, just pure joy to play. The film festival, unfortunately, is utterly tedious endless, and every minute playing it made me wish I was doing anything else. Overall, I feel like version 2.3 was just a fairly average filler patch, not as engaging as they managed to make 2.1, but not deserving of the backlash. It's a shame they didn't line up their anniversary with a major patch, since that would have made people much less upset. The next chapter begins with Cartithia missing and Rover searching for her. Her trail leads to Septimond, but quickly goes cold. We see a vision of her confronting Arsinosa, the city's guardian, but nothing more. The Guardian is set to appear at the climax of the Aegon of Champions, a gladiatorial tournament which is about to begin, so, of course, we decide to stick around. We meet Lupa, a talented gladiator abandoned by her house after she uncovered a match-fixing scandal. Sensing Rover's strength, she suggests teaming up. Since Rover feels hints of Cartithia's frequency lingering around her, we agree to compete. As we rise through the Aegon, we see glimpses of Lupa transforming into someone else. We learn the tragic fate of Mia, a gladiator from long ago who was driven to her death during a past Aegon. Lupa is somehow connected to her. Frolova appears, this time to warn that Lupa will trigger a new dark tide within mere days. As we fight our final challenge, past and present blur, and we fight off waves of TDs while Cartithia battles with the corrupted Arsinosa. After claiming victory, we investigate the anomalies and discover that Mia was created by Leviathan in an attempt to summon the Dark Tide, but sacrificed herself to save the city. The Fractidors have trapped Septimond inside a loop, attempting to make history repeat itself by forcing Lupa to take on Mia's role, their end goal to revive the Thranodian. With her resolve strengthened by the truth, Lupa steps up and defeats the last corrupted remnant of the past and releases the city from Cristoforo's grip. I've shared my more in-depth thoughts on this chapter in yet another dedicated video. I do have a few critiques, but overall it lived up to the standard set in version 2.2. The narrative was far more ambitious, with a slow reveal of the time loop Lupa eventually shatters, and yet they managed to make the moment-to-moment experience compelling while slowly revealing the more complex story behind the immediate events. Lupa's character growth was again very well done, and I was particularly happy to see them avoid the expected warrior torn between their ideals and their loyalty to the house trope, and instead have her question those ideals so central to her entire culture, and not to mention they made her solve her own problem rather than just leaving it to Rover. Plus, of course, there's Cristoforo, who I barely mentioned in my summary, who was a fantastic villain who felt absolutely captivating whenever he showed up. Most importantly, it was fun and left me wanting more. The main thing I felt was still missing was some connection to the characters we met before. Lupa and Cartithia's scenes together showed promise, and the three of us together at the end felt like such an overdue payoff on that front. I hoped they would pick this thread up later on. The introduction of Augusta and Yuno in this quest gave me hope that perhaps we'd see Lupa and Cartithia team up with them for the next chapter of Septimond's story too. Once again, I had slightly mixed feelings about the exploration in 2.4, though for an entirely different reason. Septimond is big and packed with stuff to do, with tons of verticality to make the most of flight, and the city itself is majestic. I loved when they made it overrun with TDs after the conclusion of the main story, so we could go through and clean it up at our leisure. But for some reason, it didn't inspire me to explore for fun the same way Raguna had. Perhaps it's the oddly gloomy and somewhat barren atmosphere that lingered even after the end of the story, but either way, I feel like reaching the 80% exploration required for the event rewards was more of a chore than usual. The next chapter begins when Rover learns there are lingering traces of Leviathan somewhere in the sea north of Raguna and sets out to investigate. We're cast into the depths by the insane Primus Fenrico and saved by Frolova, who drags us into her sonorosphere. Despite our mutual distrust, we agree to work together to reclaim the last remnant of Leviathan's power from the Order. As we make our way towards our target, we uncover Frolova's past, her traumas, and her goals. Orphaned by a terrible catastrophe, she hosts the souls of her lost loved ones in her lost beyond. There whispers forever in her ears and seeks a way to bring them back to life. We also uncover Fenrico's plans. He intends to use Leviathan's energy with Frolova's lost beyond to house the Ragunese's subconscious as a way to conquer the Dark Tide once and for all. But it's clear that whatever his intent, he has fully become a puppet of Leviathan and he's about to unleash the Dark Tide on the world instead. We confront him, and in defeat, he uses one brief moment of clarity to sacrifice himself to seal the gateway and prevent the tide from returning once again. Goal achieved, our alliance with Frolova instantly crumbles into confrontation. We fight, and as Frolova takes the gem, we land a fatal blow, only to see Cristoforo step in to retrieve it just before we can catch it. Frolova didn't truly die, but she's about as close as she can get. She merged with her lost beyond, and she now lives on inseparable from the realm that she created. This story was truly brilliant. Frolova's tale was presented with uncompromising depth and clarity, explaining how her innocence was twisted by trauma until she could commit unspeakable atrocities without ever excusing her decisions. Gachas often do their villains a disservice. They take any antagonist and neuter them, turning them into an ally because they fear that evil might not sell. As I explained in one video in the lead up to this patch, I felt we had reasons to hope that Kuro would avoid this trap, and I was ecstatic that they stuck to it and delivered the story Frolova truly deserved. The result was a third story in a row which transcended from good for a gacha to genuinely good. I still hold a soft spot for Kartathea personally, but Frolova's story has moral depth to it which was even more impressive in some ways than either of the previous quests. It was great to see some personality and even flaws from the rover, to have a character who challenged them and forced us to question their morals. I wish they had let Fenrico's story get a little more spotlight too. He was an egotistical leader, corrupted by darkness, but his inner strength shone through at a crucial moment, which turned him into a welcome contrast to Frolova's irredeemably broken moral compass. But once again, the one thing I was left wishing for was a story at this level of quality, but with similar depth for multiple characters at once, with relationships between them which make the world at large feel as alive as any individual character. Next, Rover returns to Septimond, where Augusta invites us to join her on the Hunt, an annual expedition where the gladiators fight back the resurgent Dark Tide. Rover agrees, as long as we can search for a relic from the Sentinel, rumoured to be hidden in the area. At first, we try to hunt down and trap a dangerous Chronosaurus, which should be key to restricting the tide's advance, but Yuno eventually reveals that this is merely bait. Her true target is an entity known as the False Sovereign. She gave up her gift of foresight in exchange for a forte which could defeat the Dark Tide for good, but when the Sovereign finally emerges, it survives her attack and escapes. As the Sovereign gains strength, we search through the ruins of Murmur's town, haunted by memories of Augusta's childhood, and eventually find the pure Dark Tide frequency we need to track it down. After an epic battle, Augusta defeats the Sovereign by drawing on the power of all the fallen gladiators of the past, and its threat is suppressed for another year. However, Yuno is gone, erased from the world's memory, all her deeds attributed to Rover. Even Augusta, her best friend, remembers nothing. Rover refuses to accept this sacrifice, enters the realm of chaos, and gathers the fragments of her memories and her soul to restore her to the world. She returns intact, but still nobody remembers her at all. From the responses I've seen, the first half of this patch was fairly well received, but the second was less popular, and, of course, even the first half fell short of the bar set by 2.5 in many ways. Many loved it, of course, and for some it's their favourite so far, but personally, I was mildly disappointed from the start. The presentation felt a little less polished. There was a lot of exposition, clearly intended to set up the finale to the region which was due to come out next patch, but it wasn't integrated as smoothly, and there were several places where it really dragged, none more so than the slog of Murmur's town. More importantly, the character arcs also felt a little off. Augusta had some growth, where she confronted the whispers which haunted her for years and learned to trust her own will rather than the allure of destiny, but for me it kind of felt shoehorned in. Her backstory was fantastic, with all the character growth anyone could hope to see, so she started the quest as a charismatic leader. She didn't need to show any growth. Her personality at the end is identical to who she was at the beginning, and there was never any doubt in between, so all of that felt like filler to me. And Yuno's arc wasn't really growth and seemed more of a setup for something in the future. Again, not necessarily a problem, but it made her story unsatisfying to me. Her fixation on the rover also felt unearned, and then their connection became so central to her part of the story that it stood out even in comparison to the unnatural speed at which characters like Lupar came to rely on him. The pacing suffered as a result, and while the cutscenes were as epic as always, I was left feeling underwhelmed for the first time in half a year. But the biggest disappointment for me, why was Lupar not invited? The one thing which I'd been yearning for months was some stronger connections between the different quests, some opportunities for characters other than Rover to build relationships with one another. Instead, these events felt even more isolated than before. I could accept Kartathea being absent from the hunt since she's not from Septimond, but there's no excuse for excluding Lupar. We had an entire arc where we compete in the Aegon, a tournament intended to prove which gladiators are most capable, and Lupar won the competition. She should have been the first person they wanted to come with them. They had some throwaway justification for her not being there, but it was a poor excuse. Her absence from this quest was a huge missed opportunity and, unfortunately, a sign of things to come. On balance, these quests were pretty good overall. They put the pieces into place for the grand finale, and I can see why some people loved them. Sadly, they didn't work for me. The one saving grace, I thought, was the fascinating story hook it left behind. Augusta does not remember Yuno. Surely they'd address that in the finale? And then came the grand finale. We returned to Ragunna, hoping Kartathea might have some answers about the civilization capsule, the relic of the sentinel we recovered from Zangui's platter. But the moment we arrive at Avenolium, we see her assassinated by Galbrena. Cantarella secures Karti's body while we set out to track her murderer. Ragunna swiftly falls into chaos as the dark tide spreads unchecked. The defensive echoes fall, and civilians are swiftly evacuated as we team up with Avidius to hunt Galbrena down. We find her surrounded by civilians, who she promptly murders in cold blood, and then reveals they were tide spawns all along. Fenrico returns from the dead out of nowhere and confronts Galbrena. During the fight, he moves to strike an innocent follower of the Order, and Galbrena leaps in front to take the blow herself. Fenrico claims he has become an enlightened one and demands that we hand over the capsule so he can save the world, but Galbrena denounces him in turn. In the midst of the fight, we are sucked into the capsule along with Galbrena, where she hands us Kartathea's pendant, which contains a message from our friend urging us to trust Galbrena. She tells us the Threnodian is close to rebirth through the machinations of the Fractidus, and only by slaying Leviathan can we resurrect Kartathea. Avidius then has his moment where he is almost consumed by corruption, but instead finds the strength within to sacrifice himself and push back the tide just a little. As the dark tide surges across the land, our friends from far and wide come to fight. Galbrena distracts Leviathan, and we follow her footsteps, learning the truth about her past along the way. In the final battle, all the Resonators work together to overwhelm Leviathan, destroying it entirely and ending the Age of Divinities forever. We then have a separate quest where we see Choyuan's journeys through Rinascita, filling in some of the background events, though it was pretty short in comparison. This quest received rave reviews. Pretty much every response I've seen was absolutely ecstatic and praised it as the absolute peak of Rinascita, the best story they've created so far, which honestly kinda surprised me. Maybe it's because I played it weeks after everyone else did and missed out on the hype of the moment, but I was once again left disappointed. So, looking back on the general consensus and seeing all of the 10 out of 10 scores was a weird feeling. Again, reminder, when I disagree with everyone, my instinct is to wonder why I'm the odd one out. I don't disagree with anyone's take on it because the experience is so subjective. The points we're about to explore are an attempt to understand where that disconnect comes from, not convince anyone they're wrong for having a blast. Right at the start, I was thrown off by the presentation of Kartathea's death. I've come to have high expectations for WuWa's story presentation. It was one of the game's biggest strengths even before version 2, and they've only improved over time. Kartathea is probably my favorite character in the game, one I care about the most, and yet her assassination felt like such a non-event to me. Why was that? For one thing, the reaction of the characters was oddly empty. They gritted their teeth a little and sounded slightly sad, but even in the moment between her death and their noticing that her tacet mark, at least, is still connected to something, they did not react like her death was something they cared about all that much. I can buy Rover's presentation as the ever-stoic hero, but Cantarella's was the same. Her reaction wasn't unrealistic, but it was unmoving. The sound design in particular was underwhelming. The somber and mournful music far too subdued to express the devastation this should have caused. It reminded me of the times I've tried watching a horror film with the sound turned off to experience how important music is to setting the mood. Even the most terrifying films can become a farce when their sounds are missing, and the same works for any emotional moment. Music manipulates us on a subconscious level. Here, it left me underwhelmed. And then, after the moment where it happened, everyone was too busy dealing with the chaos to let it sink in that she was gone. There were no moments where the characters missed their fallen friend, no places where her absence led to difficulties they had to overcome. Kartathea's death was clearly intended to raise the stakes, but for me, it shattered my immersion before the story really had a chance to pull me in. I also think this was one of those times where they let the gacha take over the story. Galbrena is an interesting character. Her backstory was great, and she's badass from start to finish. It was honestly awesome to see someone other than the rover taking point and making things happen at such a crucial moment. But I don't think this was the right moment. They had done such a great job throughout Rinascita in introducing characters early, letting us get to know them, or at least encounter them, before bringing them front and center. Kartathea, Folova, even Augusta Augusta and Yuno had more presence as a result. Even Cantarella influenced the story before we met her. While Galbrena was technically included in Augusta's flashbacks, we didn't know her, and yet she took center stage for the climax of the entire region. Half of the playtime was focused on building up her character and exploring her history, instead of the fascinating relationships between the rest of the cast, let alone any dangling story threads they haven't tied together. Unfortunately, I don't think there's anything they could have done differently without fundamentally changing everything that happened. They broke one of the basic principles of storytelling: don't introduce something new right at the end. Rules are made to be broken, however, and in this case, it clearly worked for the vast majority of players, so I can't say they made a bad decision here. I'm absolutely the odd one out for being thrown off by this. All the same, for me, it made both Galbrena's history and the main narrative less engaging. And that leads me to the thing which disappointed me the most, the inclusion of the other characters. As I've hinted at in this video, for months the only thing I wanted the most was for Kuro to start threading all the characters into their story, rather than just focusing so much on whoever happens to be on the gacha banner at the time. This was their chance to do that, and the moments when everyone showed up are one of the reasons many people were so hyped throughout the quest. All the Rinascita cast were there, and the Black Shores too. Even Calculator showed up. It was great that so many came to help, and technically they gave me what I asked for. But while so many made an appearance, that wasn't what I actually wanted. A character standing in the background and offering occasional lines of encouragement does not cut it, even if their assistance in the climactic cinematics was amazing. Cantarella's involvement, for example, was better than most, with her knowledge of poisons and antidotes turned into a vital resource we needed for the quest, but even that wasn't quite it. I don't want them to merely exist or even just participate. I want their stories to continue. There were so many interesting threads to follow. Where were the moments between Augusta and Yuno? Yuno must surely be walking a tightrope here. She'll want to rebuild her friendship with Augusta, but every step along the way, her intimate knowledge of Augusta's past would risk her coming across as a psycho stalker instead of a fresh new friend. What about Carlotta and Cantarella? Their families are still mortal enemies, yet the pair of them could build such a fantastic friendship together and slowly work towards healing the breach between their rival factions. What the hell is going through Phoebe's head? She's supposed to be the religious one. Her Primus died, was resurrected, then died again, each time revealing the deep corruption at the heart of the Order. Her Blessed Maiden, missing for decades, returned to the world and saved them from the Thronodians' grasp, and then she got assassinated too. Phoebe should be in turmoil. Where even was the payoff between Augusta and Galbrena? Even though we spent so much time on Galbrena in this patch, their connection barely gets a mention. I could go on for hours. Kuro have created so many fantastic characters and set up fascinating situations. It would have been a tall order to dive deep into everything, especially since so much of the playtime was eaten up by Galbrena, but they barely even acknowledged any of this, and the few times they did were just brushed aside. For me, those moments where the group were planning really symbolized this. All the characters together, yet every single one was stood facing Rover, the center of attention. Many people who enjoy WuWa love the fact that Rover is the center of every other character's universe. It's the deepest reason they love the game so much. When it means all these other fascinating stories never see the light of day, I'll never quite find that satisfying. And finally, my other big complaint was the way this quest trampled over any sense of consequence. Version 2.5, Frolova's story, was an absolute triumph. At the end, while Frolova was not gone, she was disconnected from the world, isolated in her lost beyond. Fenrico had his moment too, where he saw his own corruption and redeemed himself through sacrifice. I knew this meant Frolova would return someday, but the gravitas with which it came across let me hope they'd let this consequence linger and treat her return as a truly monumental moment. An echo of Gandalf, whose death in Moria was truly devastating and whose return renewed hope without invalidating our earlier pain. So they threw that out the window. Fenrico is just there, corrupted yet again, echoing the same story with far less impact. The only acknowledgement that he died and yet somehow returned was Rover saying he shouldn't be here. We explored what happened in Choyan's side story later on, but that doesn't alter how this felt in the main quest. And Frolova, not even addressed at all. She shows up in a cutscene doing her Fractidus things once more and then saunters off after a brief chat with the other bad guys at the end. These 2 points were a massive disappointment for me, and yet I was still surprised by that moment at the end of the climactic cutscene. The Fractidus all appeared in a rift in the sky, applauding all our heroes. Surely this was the moment they'd reveal how our victory in fact served their nefarious ends and set up a fresh new conflict for the next major version? But no, they just said that we were all on the same side all along and then left. This not only lessened the enjoyment of the 2.7 quest itself, but also cut down my anticipation for future stories too. And not to mention, yet another fake-out death for Kartathea. I didn't mind it all that much in her original quest since it felt fitting in the narrative. This time, as I explained earlier, it didn't work for me. To be clear, these were the reasons I didn't enjoy 2.7 as much as the vast majority of players. Most people rated it an easy 10 out of 10. Even though I didn't feel the same, and even though I've highlighted why I felt differently here, I don't necessarily think it was bad. Galbrena's story was pretty great. Avidia's too was surprisingly well done. It was fun to see our friends all fight together and contribute to the story in other ways as well. The cinematic cutscenes were incredible. The moment where the Thronodian called out to Abby and asked why he betrayed them was brilliant and leaves so many questions. It was also nice to have Choyan's quest at the end to show us some of the events from a different perspective, and his fight with Geshu Lin was sublime. My disappointment comes more from just how high my expectations had become. Kuro had set up so many fascinating story threads only to leave them out entirely and made some decisions which contravened some of the more impactful moments in previous quests. I'm sad to have missed out on the hype and can only hope that Kuro strike a better balance next time around. And finally, version 2.8. Rover is pulled into a sonorosphere containing Honami City, which was destroyed decades ago but frozen in its final moment. The cityscape is filled with phantoms of people who died that day, repeating their final moments unaware. We meet Chisa, who has become trapped in Honami for months. The only way out is to break through Neon Tower, the source of the lament. Chisa's only friend, Sumika, had attempted to break the cycle but vanished instead. Chisa opens up to us as we explore the city, collect Sumika's memories, and search for the path to our escape. Even though we're briefly separated, we find our way to each other again, defeat the TD controlling the tower, and reconnect Honami to the outside world. This story, again, fell flat for me. I could actually have been its target audience in many ways. It almost reminded me of Makoto Shinkai's movies, which are among my favorite films of all time. Honami City is gorgeous, and the cinematography in this quest was breathtaking, very reminiscent of the aesthetics of films like Your Name. I like romance stories when they're done well, especially when you throw in some science fantasy time-bending shenanigans to make things interesting. I was ready for a chill story exploring this fractured city, getting to know this stranger stuck here on her own as we search for our escape. But Rover's friendship with Chisa was far too rushed. We barely interacted with her, yet she suddenly started pouring her heart out to us, and we acted as if we had deep connection with her right from the first moment. The moments of intimacy just felt unearned. Relationship stories were when they're built up through shared experiences. The setup of this situation was intriguing, and the challenges involved would have been a perfect way to build a nuanced friendship over time, but by rushing it, they broke the illusion. I've seen some people say there's no way they could have set it up and paid it off in a single patch, but the quest is longer than a movie, yet they managed it just fine. It's not impossible, it just takes care and skill and nuance in the storytelling. Chisa was isolated, alone, traumatized by her past, grieving the loss of her only friend. There could have been barriers there at first, and as we fought monsters and shared moments of calm together, the depth of connection we built could have felt justified in the end. Instead, the pacing was all over the place, and their friendship felt unearned, and in the end, Rinascita's postscript fell completely flat. However, even the lowest points of Rinascita's story were far better than I'd ever have expected. Even when I was feeling disappointed, it was obvious what they were trying to do and why many people would find those things incredibly moving or exciting. My disappointment came because I could not only see what they were aiming for, but also ways they could have made me feel that way as well. And at its best, it was incredible. From 2.2 through to 2.5, every chapter really hit the spot, and they explored different types of story too. Kartathea's was my favorite just because I'm biased, but it was a simple story told well. Lupa's was more complex, more ambitious when it came to narrative structure. Then Frolova's was morally complex, exploring deeper questions and challenging our protagonist's worldview. The start and end of the story were perhaps a little too focused on bringing the hype instead, so they left me wishing they had paid off the remaining threads just a little better, but the patches in between more than made up for that. And so we set our sights on Lahai-Roi. Despite my feelings about the latest chapters in Rinascita, I am cautiously optimistic. So far, Kuro have made improvements at every turn. They haven't been afraid to try new things, and while they do seem to fall back on gathering wives as a way to paper over their cracks, they've proven they can tell fantastic tales in isolation, and there are signs they're figuring out how to tell a wider story. And honestly, as beautiful as Rinascita turned out to be, deep down, I mourned for the sci-fi aesthetic which had caught my attention in the first place. Lahai-Roi looks phenomenal, a fresh new direction which recaptures the original idea while retaining the brighter, more optimistic tone which made Rinascita such a breath of fresh air in the first place. The characters look fun, and I'm curious how on earth Rover enrolling in the Star Torch Academy will make sense. Maybe they'll finally make the most of having a wider cast of characters interacting with each other. But even if they don't, it will undoubtedly be a hell of a ride. Until next time!